Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, January 4th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The 101st Airborne is deployed in Romania, simulating war with Russia. So, about 4,000 members of the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division are still deployed in Romania as part of a military buildup in Eastern Europe that President Biden ordered last year, as the Pentagon is still deciding whether to maintain current troop levels. So, last year, around the time Russia invaded Ukraine, Biden started sending more troops to Europe, specifically Eastern Europe, what they call NATO's eastern flank, Poland, the Baltic states, and Romania. And this brought troop levels in Europe to over 100,000 for the first time since 2005. And, back then it was more about supporting U.S. operations in the Middle East, the presence in Europe, and Europe served as a transit hub. And but now, this buildup is specifically aimed at Russia. And the 101st Airborne was sent over there. And this is the first time since World War II that they've been deployed to Europe. And that's what they're most famously known for, the 101st Airborne, specifically for jumping on Normandy on D-Day, and then their role in the war, uh, in that war. So here they are back in Europe. And the New York Times, they reported on Tuesday that some 101st Airborne soldiers, they are stationed at a base near the Romanian city of Constanța, which is on the Black Sea in southeastern Romania, while others are further north, just a few miles from the Ukrainian border, and are simulating fighting Russia in Ukraine. So if you're watching the video, just look at the map quick. You see Constanța is on the Black Sea, southeastern Romania, and just north of that, this is Ukraine. This is Moldova here, but this little border with Ukraine is where they are drilling, somewhere around there. And as part of these drills, they're doing exercises with Romanian troops, launching helicopter assaults, firing artillery, and digging trenches similar to those on the front lines in Ukraine's Kherson Oblast. So they are practicing, fighting against Russia in Ukraine. So CBS News, they reported back in October that the 101st Airborne was in Romania. They sent a reporter over there to watch them drill, and they had this news segment on it, which I embedded here in the article if you want to go check it out, because it's really something. These commanders that they talk to say that they are prepared to fight tonight, as they say, which a lot of army units, say that when they're talking about their drills. But commanders told CBS that they were in Romania to protect NATO territory, but they said they are also ready to enter Ukraine if the war escalates. And these drills were just 4 miles from the Ukrainian border. So, they're right there. Now, this New York Times report about the 101st Airborne, it kind of stressed that, they're there for deterrence. And realistically, if the U.S. was preparing to enter the war directly, they would have to send a lot more troops than 4,000 airborne soldiers. Although are other troops in Romania. I'm not sure the exact levels there, but I know, Romania, Poland, and the Baltics, they sent like tens of thousands of extra troops there. So there's a decent presence there. But if they really wanted to go fight Russia in Ukraine, they would have to send more. I guess they could also deploy with other NATO countries' soldiers if that's what they were doing. But, not that there's any indication right now that the U.S. is going to take that step. But still, I mean, just the fact that they're over there preparing for this, doing these drills is something. So again, we have this military buildup in Eastern Europe, and the Pentagon is expected to decide soon if it's going to maintain these current troop levels or reduce them or increase them. I doubt they're going to reduce them. They may increase them, but I have a feeling they're going to keep them at the same levels and make it more of a permanent deployment. Now, they always frame these deployments as rotational because technically any NATO countries that joined after the Cold War, east of Germany, they're not supposed to have a permanent NATO troop presence in those countries as part of an agreement with Russia. But these rotational deployments are constant, so it really is permanent. But I think there are plans to build some new facilities in the Baltic states, and they want to pay for it. They want the NATO troops there. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and of course Poland. They're really ramping things up. So, I think we're going to see probably they're going to maintain these levels and make it more of a permanent thing, even though technically they might say it's not permanent, but really it is. Okay, so the next one here. So the death toll in the Ukrainian HIMARS strike on Russian soldiers in Donetsk rises to 89. So Russia's defense ministry said on Wednesday that 89 Russian soldiers were killed in the Ukrainian HIMARS strike on a facility housing Russian soldiers in Donetsk that took place on January 1st. And this raises the death toll. They originally said 63 soldiers were killed. So close to 100 now. That's pretty serious um, attack. And as I said when I first covered it, it appears to be the deadliest Ukrainian attack on Russian soldiers of the war. And Ukraine did this using the U.S. provided HIMARS rocket systems. And Russia said they fired 6 of them, and 4 struck a school that was being used to house Russian soldiers. They said that the death toll increased when they removed bodies out of the rubble that was left. Now, Russia is blaming this strike on the Russian soldiers using their personal cell phones. So I'll read a quote here from Lieutenant General Sergei Sevyukov. He is a official in the Russian armed forces and the Russian defense ministry. He said, quote, "It has already become obvious at present that the main cause of the occurrence was activation and large-scale use, contrary to the ban, of personal phones by personnel within reach of the enemy's destruction means," end quote. So I don't know, if I was in the Russian military, I wouldn't be too happy that they were blaming this on the soldiers that just got killed. But I remember that there's been reports that say that's why Ukraine has had some success, or have been able to target Russian soldiers in certain areas because they were using their cell phones. And here that appears to be being confirmed by the Russian military here. And he said that the use of the cell phone enabled the enemy to take the bearing and determine coordinates of servicemen location to deliver a missile strike. And of course, it's possible, it's likely, I would say, that the U.S. provided Ukraine with the intelligence to carry out this strike. So we know that they are using, giving Ukraine, intelligence like that. All right. So the next article here, Israel's new foreign minister passed a message to Sergei Lavrov from the U.S. This is according to a report from the Times of Israel, but it was reported in a few other Israeli media outlets. So Israel's new foreign minister, Eli Cohen, he spoke with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, on Tuesday. And Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, he spoke with Cohen a day earlier on Monday. And an Israeli diplomatic official told the Times that Blinken was aware of the planned call with Lavrov and asked Cohen to pass a message, the contents of which the Israeli source did not disclose. So we don't know what the U.S. wanted to tell Russia. So Blinken has barely spoken with Lavrov since the February 24th invasion of Ukraine. He's totally failed his job as a diplomat. And the Biden administration has largely abandoned diplomacy with Moscow. The only known discussion between Blinken and Lavrov of the war took place in July, and that focused on a prisoner swap. That's when they were discussing the Griner for Victor Bout swap, which ended up happening. But they didn't discuss the war in Ukraine, according to the readouts and stuff, what the U.S. was saying. So Cohen, it's interesting because Cohen, he signaled in comments on Monday that the new Israeli government under Netanyahu might be more neutral toward Russia and Ukraine than the previous government. Cohen said that the Netanyahu government will talk less about the war in public. And what he's referring to there is that the previous Israeli governments under Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, they were part of a coalition, and Bennett was the first prime minister, and then Lapid came in after. Bennett had a very it was pretty short lived. Actually, I guess Lapid's time as prime minister was much more short lived. Um, but anyway, so they didn't give military aid to Ukraine, but they did condemn Russia's invasion, and they accused Moscow of war crimes. But before kind of coming out publicly and criticizing Russia, Israel attempted to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. I actually linked to an article there from the Financial Times from all the way back in March of 2022 that said Ukraine and Russia explore neutrality plan in peace talks, and these were kind of negotiations that were ongoing. And it said that Bennett, the Israeli prime minister at the time, had been the primary international mediator on these talks. And this was before the Istanbul talks, I believe, where Russian and Ukrainian officials held in-person talks that the U.S. ended up sabotaging, or NATO, Boris Johnson, and likely at the behest of the U.S. So it's just interesting. We'll see. And this Israeli official that said, Blinken said to pass a message. He suggested that, is this new government is going to try to mediate. That's a role that they're going to try to pursue now. So we'll see how this plays out. But it could be another country like Turkey that might want to, broker a deal between Russia and Ukraine. All right, the next one here, Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, he says that some NATO members want to raise military spending levels for the whole alliance. He says that they want to push others to increase military spending by setting a minimum target of 2% of a country's gross domestic product, their GDP. So right now, NATO has a goal. They've been trying to get their members, all 30 of their members, to reach that 2% mark. But few members are spending that much. But anyway, so this is a goal right now that NATO has set. And Stoltenberg is saying that some members want that to be, a floor and want them to spend much more than that 2%. So right now, where it stands right now, according to an estimate from the British Parliament, only 9 NATO members would have reached the 2% mark in 2022. Only 9 out of 30. So they're still a long way off. But it's not clear if that's the exact numbers yet, because NATO usually puts out an official report on its members' military spending, but they haven't put one out yet for 2022. But I'm guessing this British estimate is probably right. And it factors in pledges to increase military spending that were made in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As of course, we've seen, Eastern European countries really say they're going to step up their military spending. And Germany, which is Europe's largest economy, announced in 2022 that it would increase military spending by 107 billion over the next 5 years. But German officials are saying they're not going to reach that 2% GDP mark until 2025 at the earliest, I think. So they're still a long way from that goal. And this is another way that, the weapons makers are just cashing in on this war, because you have all these European countries stepping up military spending. A lot of the former Soviet states are sending their old Russian equipment to Ukraine, and they're going to replace it with shiny new, NATO equipment. So it's just another way they're cashing in. And there's some NATO members that are looking to radically increase their military spending, including Poland. So their goal is to bring military spending to 3% of its GDP by 2023, with a longer-term goal to reach 5%. 5% is a lot. Just for reference, the U.S., which is the biggest military spender in the world, dedicates about 3.5% of its GDP to military spending. So Poland's looking to get way over that. All right, the next one here. The U.S. says that its approach to Maduro, the Venezuelan president, is not changing. So the State Department said this on Tuesday that the U.S. approach toward Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is not changing and said crippling economic sanctions on Venezuela will remain. So this came from Ned Price, the State Department spokesman. He says that still claims that Maduro is not the legitimate leader of Venezuela. And his comments came after Maduro said that Venezuela was ready to work toward normalization with the U.S. And Venezuela's opposition voted to dissolve the so-called interim government and removed our Juan Guaido as the so-called interim president. So the U.S. recognized Guaido as interim president in 2019 after rejecting the results of the 2018 election that saw Maduro secure another term. The U.S. also backed a failed coup attempt against Maduro, ramped up sanctions that have done little but hurt ordinary Venezuelans. The U.S. So the U.S. also didn't recognize the 2020 parliamentary elections, and the opposition that voted to get rid of Guaido, they're acting as the National Assembly, which is Venezuela's legislature, but they're doing so kind of as an alternative one that doesn't actually have power in Venezuela because they were elected in 2015 and they didn't recognize the 2020 elections. So despite reality in Venezuela, the U.S. and its allies have given this National Assembly control over Venezuela's offshore assets. And Ned Price is saying that they continue that the only remaining democratically elected institution in Venezuela is that 2015 National Assembly. And when he was asked about sanctions, Price said that the overall Venezuela-related sanctions are going to remain in place. So that's where things stand with what the U.S. is saying. Now, while Price insists that it's business as usual, there have been changes. The U.S. has eased sanctions very slightly. After Maduro resumed talks with the opposition in November, the U.S. granted a license to Chevron to resume pumping oil in Venezuela. They also agreed to release $3 billion that was frozen by the U.S. and its European allies, $3 billion in Venezuelan funds. It's really amazing that how the U.S. and the EU could do this. Just take the assets of a country and just give them to whoever they want. Anyway, so sanctions have eased slightly. So I think something's happening. Something's in the works. Probably back channel. But the position still is that they don't recognize Maduro, and the sanctions are still in place. So it's not good for the people of Venezuela. Okay, so the next one here. So Ben-Gvir, the radical national security minister in Netanyahu's new government, he ended up going to Al-Aqsa, the mosque in East Jerusalem, in occupied East Jerusalem. Even though there was all these reports yesterday, as I went over, that he wasn't going to go, but he ended up going anyway. So this is from Middle East Eye. It says Israel's far-right national security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir entered Al-Aqsa Mosque's courtyards in occupied East Jerusalem on Tuesday in a move bound to inflame tensions. A video posted on social media shows Ben-Gvir touring the courtyards with a heavy security detail. On Monday, the Palestinian movement Hamas warned Israel that it won't sit idly by if the new security minister visits Al-Aqsa Mosque, as he vowed to do. So following his visit, he said that the new government will not surrender to threats from Hamas. He said the Temple Mount is the most important place for the people of Israel, which is, he said, that's the Jewish name for the site. So this is really going to increase tensions. I saw one report that said a rocket was fired out of Gaza after he made the trip. It's not clear, I don't think, if it was Hamas or one of the other groups inside Gaza. But this goes to show what this new government is going to be doing. And he did this, I believe there was opposition. Netanyahu might have told him not to go, but he ended up going anyway. So there might be some division in the government. But, it's important to point out that Lapid, who's no friend of the Palestinians, he said, Ben-Gvir shouldn't go, calling it a deliberate provocation, and said that it would result in people dying. So it's just important to point that out. So yeah, it's just something to keep an eye on with what's going to happen, what kind of reaction there's going to be. And there's been more violence in the West Bank, more Palestinians killed there. So it's just not a good situation. All right, the next one. So the U.S., the White House says that the U.S. and South Korea are preparing a response to nuclear use by North Korea. So a National Security Council spokesman said this on Tuesday, that they're preparing a coordinated response to any potential nuclear use by Pyongyang. So this is kind of confusing. As I went over yesterday, Yoon, the South Korean president, said that he discussed holding joint military drills with the U.S. that involve U.S. nuclear forces. And then Joe Biden uh, kind of sparked confusion because he was asked about this and he said no. He was asked if the U.S. and South Korea were discussing joint nuclear drills. He said no. And then this National Security Council spokesman, he insisted that Biden said no because the U.S. and South Korea can't technically hold joint nuclear exercises since Seoul is not a nuclear armed state. But either way, this increased cooperation, and if joint U.S. South Korean drills eventually include U.S. nuclear forces, it's going to be a huge provocation, and it's going to ratchet up tensions on the Korean Peninsula even more. Yoon's office also responded to Biden saying no and said that talks on this issue were underway. And an unnamed senior Biden administration official confirmed to AFP that the U.S. and South Korea are working to expand military cooperation. The official said the two countries are, quote, working together to strengthen extended deterrence, including eventually through tabletop exercises that will explore our joint response to a range of scenarios, including nuclear use, end quote. The official added that the increased cooperation is consistent with what Yoon said. Um, and Yoon said that they will expand planning, information sharing, exercises, and training. So they're basically saying, yeah, what Yoon said uh, is right. It just had to get all confusing and complicated because of what Biden said, and even the White House press secretary said something that was also confusing. But this seems to be the situation. What Yoon said is right. They're just discussing for now, coordinating, planning, and it could include, U.S. nuclear forces. So it's just going to lead to more tensions on the peninsula. It comes after Kim Jong Un ordered the exponential increase of North Korea's nuclear arsenal, and they launched record missile tests in 2022 as the U.S. and South Korea resumed these major war games. And there's no end in sight to these tensions as the Biden administration just shows no interest in working to reduce them. Okay, so the last news story here, China's new foreign minister, Qin Gang, has vowed to prioritize American ties, and he praised Americans. So new Chinese foreign minister Qin Gang said that he was deeply impressed by the American people and pledged to continue to push forward the relationship between the two world powers in his new role. This article is from the South China Morning Post. So Qin, he was serving as China's ambassador to the U.S. for the past 17 months. He came in the summer of 2021. And he described this period as a time of severe challenges for China-U.S. relations. But he had very nice things to say, saying that he, thanking the American people for his time while he was there. He said that he made many friends across the U.S., and he's been deeply impressed by many hardworking, friendly, and talented American people that he met. So he's saying that his priorities are going to be strengthening, rebuilding U.S.-China relations. And he wrote this in a long Twitter thread. He said, quote, going forward, I will continue to care about and support the growth of China-U.S. relations, encourage dialogue, mutual understanding, and affinity between the two peoples, work for mutual respect, and make my due efforts for the well-being of the two peoples and for world peace, stability, and development, end quote. So he spoke with Blinken, but you just notice the difference in the rhetoric. When Blinken first came in, he was saying, China's our biggest threat. Trump was right to be tough on China. You see the difference in the way they operate. But I think he's got a, despite his good attitude, I think I, I I don't think U.S. China relations are going to be repaired anytime soon. And also, this is what he's putting out publicly, but he might be a little bitter over his time in the U.S. because um, he, according to some reporting, I know there's a report in Politico about it. He was actually kind of boxed out while he was in Washington, and he wasn't able to get as many high level meetings. He wasn't able to talk to the officials he wanted to. He wasn't treated very well while he was in Washington. So even though he's putting this out, he might be, he's going to probably remember that that the Biden administration didn't have too much respect for him. So, and him, I quote him a lot because when he first came to Washington, he brought this message of good relations, but he also warned about growing U.S. ties for Taiwan. He warned explicitly that it could lead to war between the U.S. and China. So I think just to show kind of how what his rhetoric toward the U.S. is generally very friendly, but he's also saying, but this one issue, this could lead to war between the U.S. and China, and it's something that people need to kind of wake up to. But that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have a lot of great ones. One from Medea Benjamin and Nicholas J.S. Davies. Can NATO and the Pentagon find a diplomatic off ramp from the Ukraine war? I hope they can, and I hope they want to. We have one from Reza Benam. Israel faces a reckoning, and it's about this new Israeli government, how it really exposes what Israel is, including um, it's just the assortment of people that are in this government. And we have one from Ramzi Baroud, the great Palestinian writer, Culture of Hope 2022 and the Margins of Victory in Palestine. And it's kind of him going over the events in in the previous year with relation to Palestine. Our spotlight is from Ted Snyder, our regular columnist, but it's over at the American Conservative, and it's titled Nord Stream Who, and it's about how nobody's really trying to get to the bottom of who sabotaged the Nord Stream pipelines. But that is it for today. Support the show, support antiwar.com, antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe to the show on YouTube and tell your friends about it. You could always follow me on Twitter. You could also follow antiwar.com on Twitter. Um, and yeah, just tell people about the show. I appreciate all the feedback I've been getting. But that's it for me for today. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for listening.